O. Henry, The Ransom of Red Chief, and Other Stories. The Ransom of Red Chief. It looked like a good thing, but wait till I tell you. We were down south in Alabama, Bill Driscoll and myself, when this kidnapping idea occurred to us. There was a town called Summit. Its citizens were very harmless and self-satisfied farmers. Bill and me had about $600, and we needed just $2,000 more to pull off a fraud in western Illinois with. We talked it over on the front steps of the hotel. People love their children in small towns, so a kidnapping scheme ought to do better there than in the big city, where the newspapers stirred up talk about such things. We knew that in Summit there were only a couple of constables, so it looked good. We chose for our victim the only child of a respectable and stingy citizen named Ebenezer Dorset. The kid was a boy of 10, freckled and red-haired. Bill and I decided that Ebenezer would pay a ransom of $2,000 without hesitating a moment. But wait till I tell you. About 2 miles from Summit there was a little mountain covered with a thick cedar grove. On the farthest slope of this mountain there was a cave. There we kept our things. One evening after sunset, we drove in a buggy past old Dorset's house. The kid was in the street throwing rocks at a kitten on the opposite fence. "Hey, little boy," said Bill, "would you like to have a bag of candies and a nice ride?" The boy hit Bill right in the eye with a piece of brick. "That'll cost the old man another $500, said Bill, climbing over the wheel. That boy fought like a devil, but at last we got him down in the bottom of the buggy and drove away. We took him up to the cave, and I tied the horse to a tree in the cedar grove. After dark, I drove the buggy to the little village 3 miles away, where we had hired it, and walked back to the mountain. Bill was pasting plaster over the bruises on his face. There was a fire burning behind the big rock at the entrance of the cave, and the boy was watching a pot of boiling coffee, with 2 eagle feathers in his red hair. He pointed a stick at me when I came up and said, "You cursed pale-face, how dare you enter the camp of Red Chief?" "He's all right now," said Bill, looking at the bruises on his legs. "We're playing Indians. Buffalo Bill's show is no match for this game. I'm old Hank, the trapper, Red Chief's captive, and he promised to scalp me at dawn. 'Pon my word, that kid can lick hard." Yes, sir. That boy seemed to be having the time of his life. The fun of camping out in a cave had made him forget that he was a captive himself. He immediately named me Snake-Eye the Spy, and promised that, when his brave Indian warriors returned at dawn, they would burn me. Then we had supper, and he filled his mouth with bacon and bread and sauce, and began to talk something like this. "I like this fine. I've never camped out before, but I had a pet opossum once, and I was 9 last birthday. I hate going to school. Are there any real Indians in these woods? I want some more sauce. We had 5 puppies. What makes your nose so red, Hank? My father has lots of money. I don't like girls. Why are oranges round? Have you got beds to sleep on in this cave?" Every few minutes he would remember that he was a redskin, and take his stick rifle and walk quietly to the mouth of the cave to spy on the cursed paleface. Now and then he would let out a war-whoop that made old Hank shiver. "Red Chief," I said to the kid, "would you like to go home?"
"What for?" said he. "I don't have any fun at home. I like camping out. You won't take me back home again, Snake-Eye, will you?"
"Not right away," I said. "We'll stay here in the cave a while."
"All right," said he. "That'll be fine. I've never had such fun in all my life."
We went to bed about 11 o'clock and put Red Chief between us. We weren't afraid he'd run away. He kept us awake for 3 hours, jumping up and reaching for his rifle and screaming, "Hush!" in mine and Bill's ears at any noise outside, as he imagined the cursed palefaces coming to our cave. At last I fell into a troubled sleep, and dreamed that I had been kidnapped and chained to a tree by a savage red-haired pirate. Just at dawn, I was woken up by awful screams from Bill. They weren't shouts or whoops, just as you'd expect from a man. They were simply screams such as a woman give when they see centipedes. I jumped up to see what the matter was. Red Chief was sitting on Bill's chest, holding Bill's hair with one hand. In the other, he had a sharp carving knife, and he was trying to scalp Bill, just like he'd promised him the evening before. I got the knife away from the kid and made him lie down again, but from that moment Bill's spirit was broken. He never slept again as long as that boy was with us. I slept for a while, but toward dawn I remembered that Red Chief had promised to burn me in the morning. I wasn't afraid, but I sat up and lit my pipe and leaned against a rock.
"Why are you up so early, Sam?"
asked Bill. "Me?" I said. "Oh, got a pain in my shoulder. I thought sitting up would be better."
"You're a liar," said Bill. "You're afraid. The kid promised to burn you at dawn, and you're afraid he'd do it. Isn't it awful, Sam? Do you think anybody will pay out money to get a little devil like that back home?"
"Sure," said I. "A naughty kid like that is just the kind that parents love most. Now, you and the chief get up and cook breakfast while I go on top of this mountain and look around." I went up to the top of the little mountain and looked at summit. I expected to see the strong citizens armed with pitchforks searching the neighborhood for the kidnappers. But what I saw was a peaceful countryside with nobody in sight. Perhaps they've not yet discovered that the kid is gone, I said to myself, and I went down the mountain to breakfast. When I got to the cave, I found Bill pressing himself to its wall, breathing hard, and the boy threatening him with a big rock.
"He put a hot-boiled potato down my back," said Bill, "and I boxed his ears. Have you got a gun about you, Sam?"
I took the rock away from the boy.
"No man has ever beaten the Red Chief unpunished," said the kid to Bill. "You'll pay for it."
After breakfast, the kid took a piece of string out of his pocket and went outside the cave.
"What's he up to now?" asked Bill. "You don't think he'll run away, do you, Sam?"
"No fear of it," I said. "He doesn't seem to be a homebody. But you got to make some plan about Ransom. They don't seem to understand that the kid's gone. His parents may think he's spending the night with Aunt Jane or one of the neighbors. Anyhow, he'll be missed today. Tonight we must get a message to his father demanding $2,000 for his return." Just then we heard a kind of war whoop and saw Red Chief whirling the string he had pulled out of his pocket around his head. As I jumped aside, I heard the sound of a heavy blow and a sigh from Bill. A rock the size of an egg had hit Bill just behind his left ear, and made him fall in the fire across the pot of hot water for washing the dishes. I dragged him out and poured cold water on his head for half an hour. By and by, Bill sat up and felt behind his ear and said, "Sam, don't go away and leave me here alone." I went out and caught that boy and shook him hard. "If you don't behave," I said, "I'll take you straight home. Now, are you going to be good or not?"
"I didn't mean to hurt old Hank," said he, "but why did he hit me? I'll behave, Snake Eye, if you don't send me home, and if you let me play the Black Scout today."
"You're going to play with Mr. Bill," I said. "I'm going away for a while on business. Now, you come in and make up with him and say you're sorry for hurting him, or you go home at once." I made him and Bill shake hands, and then I took Bill aside and told him I was going to Poplar Cove, a little village 3 miles from the cave, to find out what people thought about the kidnapping in Summit. Also, I wanted to send a letter to Old Man Dorset that day, demanding the ransom and telling how it should be paid.
"You know, Sam," said Bill, "this kid's made me lose my nerve. You won't leave me long with him, will you, Sam?"
"I'll be back sometime this afternoon," I said. "You must keep the boy busy and quiet till I return. And now we'll write the letter to old Dorset." Bill and I got paper and pencil and worked on the letter while Red Chief walked up and down guarding the mouth of the cave. Bill begged me to make the ransom $1,500 instead of $2,000 because he thought that nobody would give up $2,000 for that devil of a boy. To Bill's great relief, I agreed, and we wrote a letter that ran this way. Ebenezer Dorset, Esquire. We keep your boy in a secret place far from Summit where you can't find him. We demand $1,500 in large bills for his return. You must leave the money at midnight tonight at the same place and in the same box as your reply. If you agree to these terms, send your answer in writing by a messenger tonight at 8:30. The messenger has to place the answer in the box at the bottom of the post of the fence of the wheat field opposite a lonely tree. If you don't pay the money, you'll never see your boy again. If you pay the money as demanded, he will be returned to you safe and well within 3 hours. These terms are final. 2 desperate men. I put the letter to Dorset in my pocket, and I was about to start when the kid came up to me and said, "Snake Eye, you said I could play the Black Scout while you were away. I'm tired of playing Indian myself. I want to be the Black Scout. I'll have to ride to the fort and tell the settlers that the Indians are coming." "All right," I said. "It sounds harmless to me. I guess Mr. Bill will help you save the poor settlers from the savages."
"What am I to do?"
asked Bill, looking at the kid suspiciously.
"You are the horse," said Black Scout. "Get down on your hands and knees. The fort is 90 miles away, and we've got to get there on time."
Getting down on all fours, Bill said,
"Hurry back, Sam, as soon as you can. It's a pity we didn't make the ransom 1,000.
I walked over to Poplar Cove and sat around the post office and store, talking with the farmers. One of them said that Summit was all upset because old Ebenezer Dorset's boy had got lost or been stolen. That was all I wanted to know. I posted my letter and went away. When I got back to the cave, Bill and the boy were not there. So I lighted my pipe and sat down on a rock waiting for them to come back. In about half an hour, Bill appeared in front of the cave. Behind him was the kid, stepping softly like a scout, with a broad smile on his face. Bill stopped, took off his hat, and wiped his face with a red handkerchief. The kid stopped about 8 feet behind him.
"Sam," said Bill, "I suppose you think I'm a renegade, but I couldn't help it. The boy's gone. I've sent him home. Everything is over."
"What's the trouble, Bill?" I asked him.
"I rode," says Bill, "the 90 miles to the fort. Then, when the settlers were safe, I was given oats. You see, Sam, sand isn't pleasant to eat. And then, for an hour, I had to try to explain to him how a road can run both ways and what makes the grass green. I tell you, Sam, a human can't take so much. I took him by the collar and dragged him down the mountain. On the way, he kicked my legs and bit me on the thumb 2 or 3 times. But he's gone now. I'm sorry we won't get the ransom, but it was either that or Bill Driscoll to go to the madhouse."
"Bill," I said, "there isn't any heart disease in your family, is there?"
"No," said Bill. "Why?"
"Then you might turn around," I said, "and have a look behind you." Bill turned and saw the boy, and grew pale and sat down on the ground. For an hour I was afraid for his mind, and then I told him that my plan was to finish the whole job as soon as possible, and that we would get the ransom and be off with it by midnight if old Dorset agreed to our terms. So Bill cheered up enough to give the kid a weak smile and a promise to play the Russian in a Japanese war with him as soon as he felt a little better. My plan for collecting that ransom was absolutely safe. The tree under which the messenger had to leave the answer, and the money later on, was close to the road fence with big fields on all sides. If constables wanted to watch for any one to come for the note, they could see him a long way off crossing the fields, or in the road. But no, sir. At 8:30, I was hidden up in that tree, waiting for the messenger to arrive. Exactly on time, a boy rode up the road on a bicycle. He found the box at the foot of the fence post, put a piece of paper into it, and rode away again back towards Summit. I waited an hour, and then climbed down the tree, got the note, and hurried back to the cave. I opened the note. I got near the lantern and read it to Bill. "Two desperate men. Gentlemen, I received your letter about the ransom today. I think you demand too much, and so I make you a counter-proposition, which I hope you will accept. You bring Johnny home and pay me $250 in cash, and I agree to take him off your hands. You'd better come at night, for the neighbors believe he's lost, and I can't imagine what they might do to anybody they see bringing him back. Very respectfully, Ebenezer Dorset." I looked at Bill.
"Sam," he said, "what's $250 after all? We got the money. One more night of this kid will send me to a madhouse. Besides, I think it was so good of Mr. Dorset to make us such a generous offer. You aren't going to miss the chance, are you?"
"To tell you the truth, Bill," I said, "this little devil has somewhat got on my nerves, too. We'll take him home, pay the ransom, and get out of here." We took him home that night. We told him that his father had bought a rifle for him, and we were going to hunt bears the next day. It was just 12 o'clock when we knocked on Ebenezer's front door. Old Dorset came out, and Bill counted out $250 into his hand. When the kid found out we were going to leave him at home, he started screaming and grasped Bill by the leg. When his father managed to drag him away, Bill asked, "How long can you hold him?"
"I'm not as strong as I used to be," said old Dorset, "but I think I can promise you 10 minutes.
"Enough," said Bill.
"In 10 minutes I shall cross the central, southern, and middle western states and be heading for the Canadian border."
And as dark as it was, and as fat as Bill was, and as good a runner as I am, he was a good 1.5 miles out of Summit before I could catch up with him. Hearts and Crosses. Baldy Woods reached for a drink, and got it. When Baldy wanted something, he usually got it. Now he took his third drink, which was larger than the first and the second. Baldy had listened to the troubles of a friend. Now Baldy was going to tell his friend what to do. So the friend was buying him the drinks. This was the right thing for a friend to do. "I would be king if I were you," said Baldy. He said it loudly and strongly. Webb Yeager moved his broad hat back on his head. He put his fingers in his yellow hair and stirred it. But this did not help him to think better, and that's why he also got another drink. "If a man marries a queen, he ought to be something," said Webb. Here was his problem. "You're right," said Baldy. "You ought to be a king, but you're only the queen's husband. That's what happens to a man if he marries a king's daughter. His wife becomes a queen. But is he the king? No. His only duty is to go with the queen to parties, and be the father of the next king. That's not right. Yes, Webb, you're only the queen's husband, and if I were you, I'd turn everything upside down and would be king." Baldy finished his drink. "Baldy," said Webb, "you and I have been cowboys together for years. I know you very well. I would not talk about my family to anyone but you. You were working on Nopalito's ranch when I married Santa McAllister. I was a chief workman then. But what am I now? Nothing. When old McAllister was the cattle king of West Texas," Baldy went on, "you were important. You told people what to do. Your orders were as strong as his." "That was true," said Webb, "until he found out that I wanted to marry Santa. Then he sent me as far away from the ranch house as he could. When the old man died, they started to call Santa the cattle queen. Now I tell the cattle what to do, and that's all. She takes care of all the business. She keeps all the money. I have no right to sell any cattle, not one animal. Santa is the queen, and I am nothing." "I would be king if I were you," repeated Baldy Woods again. "When a man marries a queen, he ought to be equal to her. Many people think so, Webb. Your words mean nothing on the ranch. Mrs. Yeager is a beautiful lady, but a man ought to be the head of his own house." Webb was very sad. Now he was looking like a schoolboy who had lost his leadership to another strong boy. "I'm riding back to the ranch today," he said. It was clear he didn't want to go. "I have to drive some cattle to San Antonio tomorrow morning." "I'll go with you as far as Dry Lake," said Baldy. The two friends got on their horses and left the little town where they had had their meeting this morning. At Dry Lake they stopped to say good-bye to each other. They had ridden several miles in silence. But now Webb added some words to those that had been said 10 miles away. "You remember, Baldy, the time when Santa was different.
You remember the days when old McAllister kept me away from the ranch house. Do you remember how she would send me a sign that she wanted to see me? Old McAllister said he would kill me if I came up to her. Do you remember the sign she used to send, Baldy? It was a picture of a heart with a cross inside it.
"Me?" cried Baldy. "Of course I remember. Every cowboy in the ranch knew that sign of yours. We would see it on things sent out from the ranch. We would see it on everything. It would be written on newspapers, on boxes of food. Once I saw it on the back of a shirt of a cook that was sent from the ranch."
Santa's father made her promise that she wouldn't write to me or send me any word. That heart and cross sign was her idea. When she wanted to see me, she put that mark on different things that she knew I would see. And when I saw it, I rode quickly to the ranch the same night. We would have meetings outside the house.
"We all knew it," said Baldy, "but we never said anything. We wanted you to marry Santa. When we saw the heart and cross sign on something from the ranch, we always knew your horse was going to go fast that night."
"The last time Santa used this sign," said Webb, "was when she was ill. When I saw it, I got on my horse and rode quickly. It was a 40-mile ride. I went to the house because she was not at the meeting place. Her father met me at the door.
"Did you come here to be killed?" he asked. "I won't kill you now. I was going to send for you. My daughter wants to see you. Go in that room and see her. After that, come and see me, for we have to talk."
Santa was in bed. She was very ill. When she saw me, she smiled, and I sat down by the bed, though my clothes were very dirty. "Webb," she said, "I was sure you would come. Did you see the sign?" "I saw it," I said. "It's our sign," she said. "Hearts and crosses. They mean to love and suffer." And old Dr. Musgrove was there. Santa fell asleep, and Doctor said to me,
"Go away now. The little lady will be all right in the morning."
Old McAllister was outside her room. "She's sleeping," I said, "and now you can kill me. You have enough time. I've nothing to fight with." Old McAllister laughed and said to me,
"It's not good to kill the best chief workman in West Texas. I don't know where I could get another one like you. I don't want you to become a member of my family, but I can use you on the ranch if you stay away from the house. You better go and sleep, and then we'll talk." At this point, the two friends were going to separate. They shook hands with each other. "Goodbye, Baldy," said Webb. "I'm glad to see you and talk." And the two riders were on their way. Then Baldy stopped and shouted, "If I were you, I would be king." At 8 o'clock the following morning, Bud Turner got off his horse at the Nopalito ranch house. Bud was the cowboy who was taking the cattle to San Antonio. Mrs. Yeager was outside the house watering her flowers. Santa was like her father, King McAllister. She never hesitated. She was afraid of nothing. She was very proud. But she looked like her mother. She was very pretty. She was a woman, and her manners were womanly. Yet she liked to be queen. Webb stood near her, giving orders to the cowboys. "Good morning," said Bud. "Where do you want the cattle to go? To Barbara's, as usual?" Santa always answered this question. All the business, buying, selling, spending money, had been in her hands. Her husband was to take care of the cattle. When her father was alive, Santa was his secretary and helper. She had continued his work and was very successful. But this day, before she could answer, her husband spoke. "You drive those cattle to Zimmerman and Nesbitt's. I spoke to Zimmerman about it." Bud turned and wanted to go. "Wait!" called Santa quickly. She looked at her husband with great surprise in her eyes. "What do you mean, Webb?" she asked. "I never deal with Zimmerman and Nesbitt. Barbara has bought all the cattle from this ranch for 5 years. I'm not going to change my partners," she said to Bud Turner. "Take those cattle to Barbara." Bud did not know what to do. He stood there, waiting. "I want those cattle to go to Zimmerman and Nesbitt," said Webb. His eyes were cold. "It's time to start," said Santa to Bud. "Tell Barbara we'll have more cattle ready in about a month." Bud looked at Webb. "You take those cattle," said Webb. "To Barbara," said Santa quickly. "Let's stop our discussion. What are you waiting for, Bud?" "Nothing," said Bud. But he did not hurry to move away, because he did not like what had happened. "You heard what she said," cried Webb. "We do what she orders." "Webb," said Santa, "what's wrong with you today?" "I'm acting like a queen's fool," said Webb. "What can you expect?" "Let me tell you, I was a man before I married you. What am I now? The cowboys laugh at me, but I'm going to be a man again." Santa looked at him. "Be reasonable, Webb," she said quietly. "Everything is all right. You take care of the cattle. I take care of the business. You understand the cattle, and I understand the business better than you do. I learned it from my father." "I want to be king," said Webb. "All right. It's your ranch. Barbara gets the kettle." Webb got on his horse. "There are some cattle at the Hondo waterhole," he said. "They ought to be moved. Wild animals have killed 3 of them. Tell Sims about it." Santa put a hand on the horse and looked in her husband's eyes. "Are you going to leave me, Webb?" she asked quietly. "I'm going to be a man again," he answered. "I wish you success," she said with a sudden coldness. She turned and walked into the house. Webb Yeager went to the southeast as straight as he could ride, and nobody at the Nopalito knew more about him. Days passed, then weeks, then months. But Webb Yeager did not return. One day a man stopped at the ranch house. It was noon, and he was hungry. He was invited to have dinner. He talked while he was eating. "Miss Yeager," he said, "I saw a man on the Seco ranch with your name, Webb Yeager. He's the chief workman there. He's a tall, yellow-haired man. Someone of your family?" "A husband," said Santa. "That is good for the Seco ranch. Mr. Yeager is the best chief workman in the West." Everything at the ranch was going well. They had tried to work with a different kind of cattle. These cattle had been brought from England, and they were very good. They'd been successful at the ranch, and men from other ranches were interested in their cattle. As a result, one day, a cowboy arrived at the ranch and gave the Queen this letter. "Mrs. Yeager, the Nopalito Ranch. I've been told by the owners of the ranch to buy 100 of your English cattle. If you can sell these to the Seco, send them to us with the man who brings this letter. We will then send you the money. Webb Yeager, Chief Workman, Seco Ranch." Business is business. That night the 100 cattle were moved near the ranch house, ready for an early start the next morning. When night came and the house was quiet, did Santa Yeager cry alone? Did she put the letter to her heart? Or did she place the letter with other business letters in her office? There is no answer to these questions. In the middle of the night, Santa went quickly out of the ranch house. She was dressed in something dark. She stopped for a moment under a tree. There was moonlight, and the bird was singing, and there was a smell of flowers. Santa turned her face toward the southeast and threw 3 kisses in that direction. Then she hurried quietly to a small building. What she did there, we don't know, but there was a fire and a strange noise. Later, she came out with a strange iron tool in one hand. In the other, she had something that held a small fire. She hurried in the moonlight to the place where the English cattle had been gathered. Most of the cattle were dark red, but there was one cow as white as milk. And now Santa caught the white animal as cowboys catch cattle. Then she ran to the fire that she had carried here. From it she took that strange iron tool. It was white hot. There was a loud cry from the animal as the white-hot iron burned its skin. But no one seemed to hear. Everything was quiet. She ran back to the house, and there fell onto a bed. In the morning, the young man who had brought the letter started toward the Seco ranch. He had cowboys with him to help with the cattle. It took them 6 days to get to the ranch. The animals arrived at Seco Ranch one evening as the daylight was ending. They were counted by the chief workman of the ranch. The next morning at 8, a horseman rode to the Nopalito ranch house. He got down from the horse and walked to the house. The man entered the house. 2 arms fell around his neck, and someone cried out in the voice of a woman and queen together, "Webb! Oh, Webb!" "I was wrong," said Webb Yeager. "Quiet," said Santa. "Did you see it?" "I saw it," said Webb. What were they talking about? You can guess if you read the story carefully. "Be the cattle queen," said Webb. "Forget what I did if you can. I was so wrong." "Quiet," said Santa again, putting her finger upon his mouth. "There's no queen here. Do you know who I am? I'm Santa Yeager. Come here." She led him into a room. There stood a low baby's bed, and in the bed there was a baby. A beautiful, laughing baby, talking in words that no one could understand. "There's no queen on this ranch," she said again. "Look at the king. He has eyes like yours, Webb." There was a sound of steps outside, and Bud Turner was there at the door. He asked the same question he had asked almost a year ago. "Good morning. Shall I drive those cattle to Barber's, or—" He saw Webb and stopped with his mouth open. "Ba, ba, 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 ba," cried the king, waving his arms. "You hear what he says, Bud," said Webb. "We do what the king orders." And that is all. But there is one more thing. When the owner of the Seco Ranch went to look at English cattle, he asked his new chief workman, "What is the Nopalito Ranch's mark?" "X over Y," was the answer. "I thought so," said the owner. "But look at the white animal there. She has another mark, a heart with a cross inside. Whose mark is that?" Springtime à la carte. It was a day in March. Sarah was crying over her menu card. The greatest victory of Sarah's battle with the world was the deal she made with Schulenburg's home restaurant. The restaurant was next door to the old brick house where she rented a room. One evening after her dinner at Schulenburg's, Sarah took away the menu card. It was written badly, neither in English nor in German. The next day, Sarah showed Schulenburg a nice card on which the dishes were beautifully typed under their true names. Schulenburg asked her to type all his menus for 21 tables in the restaurant, a new menu for each day's dinner, new menus for breakfast and lunch when the dishes were changed or when the cards became dirty. In return, Schulenburg was to send her 3 meals a day by a waiter. Schulenburg's visitors now knew the names of the food they ate, and, at the same time, Sarah had food during a cold winter. This was very important for her. And then spring came. Spring comes when it comes. The frozen snows of January still lay in the streets. Men begin to buy Easter clothes. Janitors turn off steam. But the winter has not yet gone. One afternoon, Sarah was cold in her elegant bedroom. She had no work to do except Schulenburg's menu cards. Sarah sat in her willow rocker and looked out of the window. The calendar on the wall kept crying to her, "Spring is here! Sarah, spring is here! I tell you, look at me! Why do you look out of the window so sadly?" Sarah's room was at the back of the house. When she looked out of the window, she saw the brick wall of the box factory on the next street. There were no windows on the wall. She was thinking of last summer. That summer she had gone into the country and met a farmer. Sarah stayed 2 weeks at Sunnybrook Farm. There she had good time with old Farmer Franklin's son Walter. Young Walter Franklin was a modern agriculturalist. He had a telephone in his cowhouse, and he knew a lot about growing vegetables. And there young Walter won her heart, and together they had sat and made a crown of dandelions for her hair. They decided to get married in the spring. At the beginning of spring, Walter said, and Sarah came back to the city to earn something with her typewriter. A knock at the door drove away Sarah's dreams of those happy days. A waiter had brought the rough copy written with a pencil of the home restaurant's next day menu. Sarah sat down at her typewriter and put a card between the rollers. She worked quickly. Usually, in an hour and a half, the 21 menu cards were typed and ready. Today, there were more changes on the menu than usual. The dishes were lighter. The spirit of spring was everywhere in the menu. Sarah's fingers danced. She worked down through the courses, giving each item its position carefully. Just above the desserts, there came the list of vegetables: carrots and peas, asparagus on toast, tomatoes, beans, cabbages, and then Sarah was crying over her menu card with her head on the little typewriter table. She had got no letter from Walter in 2 weeks, and the next item on the menu was dandelions. Dandelions with some kind of sauce. Dandelions, the symbol of happy days with her dear Walter. By and by, Sarah stopped crying. She had to finish the cards. She kept on typing absently for a while with her mind and heart in the meadow with her young farmer. But soon she came back to the streets of Manhattan, and the typewriter began to rattle and jump quickly again. At 6 o'clock, the waiter brought her dinner and took away the menu cards. During her meal, Sarah put aside, with a sigh, the dish of dandelions with its egg sauce. Sarah could not make herself to eat the dandelions. At 7:30, the couple in the next room began to quarrel. The man in the room above started to play his flute. The gas went a little lower. By these signs, Sarah knew that it was time for her to read. She took The Cloister and the Hearth, the best book of the month, settled her feet on her trunk, and began to wander with Gerard. The front doorbell rang. The landlady answered it. Sarah left Gerard and Dennis and listened. And then a strong voice was heard in the hall below, and Sarah rushed to her door, leaving the book on the floor. You've guessed it. She reached the top of the stairs just as her farmer came up, 3 at a jump. "Why haven't you written? Oh, why?" cried Sarah. "New York is a very large town," said Walter Franklin. "I came here a week ago to your old address. I found out that you went away on a Thursday. I started to look for you." "I wrote," said Sarah excitedly. "Never got it." "Then how did you find me?" The young farmer smiled. "I dropped into that home restaurant next door this evening," said he. "I like a dish of vegetables at this time of year. I looked down that nice typed menu looking for something in that line. When I got below cabbages, I called for the owner. He told me where you lived." "I remember," sighed Sarah happily. "That was dandelions below cabbage." "I'd recognize that capital W above the line that your typewriter makes anywhere in the world," said Franklin. "But there's no W in dandelions," said Sarah in surprise. The young man took the menu out of his pocket and pointed to the line. She recognized the first card she had typed that afternoon. At the place where there should be the name of the meadow plant, the memory of their golden heads had allowed her fingers to type between the red cabbage and the stuffed green peppers, "Dearest Walter, with egg sauce." After 20 years. The policeman walked along the street looking important. The time was nearly 10 o'clock at night, and it was cold. There was a wind with a little rain in it. He stopped at doors, trying each door to be sure that it was locked. Now and then he looked up and down the street. The officer was like a guardian of peace. Cigar shops or lunch counters that work all night were open, but most of the doors belonged to offices, and they had been closed. In the middle of one block, the policeman suddenly began to walk slowly. In the doorway of a dark hardware shop there stood a man with an unlighted cigar in the mouth. When the policeman came up to him, the man spoke quickly. "Everything is all right, officer?" he said. "I'm waiting for my friend. 20 years ago we decided to meet here. It seems funny, doesn't it? If you want, I can explain it to you. There used to be a restaurant here very long ago. It was called Big Joe Brady's." "It was here until 5 years ago," said the policeman. The stranger struck a match and lit his cigar. In the matchlight, a pale face with clever eyes was seen. There was a little white scar above his right eyebrow. On his scarf he had a large diamond pin. "On this very day 20 years ago," said the stranger, "I had dinner here at this restaurant with my best friend Jimmy Wells. He was the best man in the world. He and I were like two brothers. I was 18, and Jimmy was 20 then." The next morning I was to go to the west side to make my fortune. Jimmy didn't go with me because he liked this city most of all and didn't want to leave. We decided to meet here again. We thought that in 20 years each of us ought to become someone and earn some money. "Your story is rather interesting," said the policeman. "It's a very long time between two meetings. Haven't you heard from your friend since then?" "Yes, we wrote to each other for some time," answered the other. "But a year or two passed and we lost track of each other. But I am sure Jimmy will come to meet me. He was really a good friend. I'm sure he'll come. I came 1,000 miles to be here this evening, and it's all right if my friend appears." The man took out a beautiful watch with small diamonds on its lid. 3 minutes to 10, he said. "We agreed to meet at 10 o'clock sharp." "You were successful in the West, weren't you?" asked the policeman. "Yes, really. I hope Jimmy is successful too." "I have to go now," the policeman said. "I hope your friend will come soon." "So long, officer." "Good night, sir," said the policeman, going away. There was now a cold, steady rain, and the wind became stronger, and near the door of the hardware shop, the man who had come 1,000 miles for a meeting with his friend stood smoking his cigar. He waited about 20 minutes when a tall man appeared. He was in a long coat, and the collar was turned up to his ears. He went in the direction of the man. "Is that you, Bob?" he asked hesitatingly. "Is that you, Jimmy Wells?" cried the man. "It's really you?" exclaimed the newcomer. "I was sure I could meet you here. Well, well, well. 20 years have passed. It's a pity the old restaurant has gone, Bob. Let's go somewhere and have a quiet talk. How was your life in the West?" "Well, I have everything now I could only dream of." "You've changed much. I thought you were shorter." "Yes, I've grown a little since then." "Are you successful in New York, Jimmy?" "In a way. I work in one of the city departments. Let's go round the city and talk about old times." The two men walked up the street arm in arm. The man from the West was telling the story of his life and career. The other one listened with interest, but was silent. There was a drugstore at the corner of the street. Its electric lights were shining brilliantly. When they came into the light, they looked at each other at the same time. The man from the West stopped suddenly. "You are not Jimmy Wells," he cried. "Even 20 years could not change the form of a man's nose." "But they could change a good man into a bad one," answered the tall man. "You're under arrest, Silky Bob. We got a telegram from Chicago that they want to see you. You're not going to make trouble, are you?" "Very well. I have a note here from you. You may read it near the window. Patrolman Wells wrote it." The man from the West took a little piece of paper. His hand was steady when he began to read, but it started to tremble by the time he had finished. This note was not very long. "Bob, I was at the place of our meeting in time. When you struck a match, I saw the face of the man they wanted in Chicago. I could not do it myself, so I asked another man to do the job. Jimmy." A Service of Love. When one loves one's art, no service seems too hard. Joe Larrabee was born in the Middle West. At 6, he drew a picture of the town pump with a prominent citizen passing by. This picture was put into a frame and hung in the drugstore window. At 20, he left for New York to become a painter. Delia Carruthers did things in 6 octaves so well in a pine tree village in the South that her relatives were sure she should go north and become a musician. Joe and Delia met in an atelier where a number of art and music students had gathered to discuss Wagner, music, Rembrandt's works, pictures, wallpaper, and Chopin. Joe and Delia fell in love with each other and in a short time were married, for when one loves one's art, no service seems too hard. Mr. and Mrs. Larrabee began housekeeping in a flat. It was a small flat, and they were happy, for they had their art, and they had each other. Joe was painting in the class of the great Magister. You know how famous he is. His fees are high, his lessons are light. Delia was studying music under Rosenstock, who is really famous too. They were very happy as long as their money lasted. Their aims were very clear and definite. Joe was to become able to draw pictures that old gentlemen who had much money would buy with pleasure. Delia was to become so familiar with music that when she saw the orchestra seats and boxes unsold, she could have sore throat and lobster in a private dining-room and refuse to go on stage. But the best, in my opinion, was the home life in that little flat. The hearty chats after the day's study, the pleasant dinners and fresh, light breakfasts, and stuffed olives and cheese sandwiches at 11 p.m. But some time later, art flagged. It sometimes does, when everything's going out and nothing's coming in. Money was lacking to pay Mr. Magister and Herr Rosenstock their prices. When one loves one's art, no service seems too hard. So Delia decided to give music lessons. 2 or 3 days she spent looking for pupils. One evening she came home very happy. "Joe, dear," she said, "I've got a pupil. Oh, the loveliest people. General A.B. Pinckney's daughter. Such a magnificent house. Joe, you ought to see the front door. And inside, Joe, I never saw anything like it before. My pupil is his daughter, Clementina. I dearly love her already. She's a delicate thing, dresses always in white, and the sweetest, simplest manners. Only 18 years old. I will give 3 lessons a week, $5 a lesson. I don't mind it a bit, because when I get 2 or 3 more pupils, I can continue my lessons with Herr Rosenstock. Now, dear, let's have a nice supper." "That's all right for you, dearly," said Joe, opening a can of peas with a carving knife. "But how about me? Do you think I'm going to let you give lessons to earn money while I amuse myself studying high art? I have to find some work." Delia came and hung about his neck. "Joe, dear, you are silly. You must keep on at your studies. I'm not giving up my music and going to work at something else. While I teach, I learn. I'm always with my music. And we can live as happily as millionaires on $15 a week." "All right," said Joe, "but I don't like it. Giving lessons isn't art." When one loves one's art, no service seems too hard. "Magister praised the sky in that drawing-room I made in the park," said Joe, "and Tinkle allowed me to hang 2 of them in his window. I may sell them." "I'm sure you will," said Delia sweetly. "And now let's be thankful for General Pinckney and this veal roast." During all the next week the Larrabees had an early breakfast. Joe was going to do some morning effect pictures in Central Park, and Delia packed him his breakfast, praised and kissed him at 7 o'clock. It was most times 7 o'clock when he returned in the evening. At the end of the week Delia put 3 $5 bills on the centre table of the flat parlour. "Sometimes," she said, "a little tired. Clementina tires me out. I'm afraid she doesn't practice enough, and I have to tell her the same thing so often. And then She always dresses in white, and that does get monotonous. But the General is the dearest old man. I wish you could know him, Joe. He comes in sometimes when I am with Clementina at the piano. He's a widower, you know, and stands there pulling his white beard. I wish you could see that parlour, Joe, Delia went on. And those curtains. And Clementina has such a funny little cough. I hope she is stronger than she looks. I really am getting attached to her. She is so kind and well-bred.
And then Joe, with the air of a Monte Cristo, drew out a 10, a 5, a 2, and a 1, all legal banknotes, and put them beside Delia's money. "Sold that watercolour of the obelisk to a man from Peoria," he said. "I wish you could see him, Deli. He saw a picture in Tinkle's window and thought it was a windmill at first. He ordered another, an oil picture, to take it back with him. Music lessons. Oh, I guess art is still in it."
"I'm so glad you've kept on," said Delia heartily. "You will certainly win, dear. $33. We've never had so much money to spend before. We'll have oysters tonight."
"And filet with champignons," said Joe. "Where is the olive fork?" On the next Saturday evening, Joe reached home first. He put his $18 on the table and washed what seemed to be a great deal of dark paint from his hands. Half an hour later, Delia arrived. Her right hand was tied up in bandages. "How is this?" asked Joe after the usual greetings. Delia laughed, but without joy. "Clementina," she explained, "insisted upon a Welsh rabbit after the lesson. She's such a strange girl. Welsh rabbits at 5 in the afternoon? The General was there. I know Clementina isn't in good health. She is so nervous. Serving the rabbit, she's spilled a lot of it, boiling hot, over my hand. It hurt awfully, Joe, and the dear girl was so sorry. But the General rushed downstairs and sent somebody out to a drugstore for some oil and things to bind it up with. It doesn't hurt so much now. Oh, Joe, did you sell another picture?" She had seen the money on the table. "Did I?" said Joe. "Just ask the man from Peoria. He got his new picture today, and he thinks he wants another watercolour and a view on the Hudson." "What time this afternoon did you burn your hand, Deli?" 5 o'clock, I think," said Deli. "The iron, I mean the rabbit, came off the fire about that time. Poor General Pinckney, Joe. When—" "Sit down here a moment, Deli," said Joe. He drew her to the sofa, sat beside her, and put his arms across her shoulders. "What job did you find 2 weeks ago, Deli?" he asked. She braved it for a moment or two with an eye full of love, and murmured a phrase or two of General Pinckney. But at last her head went down, and the truth came out with tears. "I couldn't get any pupils," she confessed, "and I couldn't bear to have you give up your lessons. And I got a place ironing shirts in that big laundry, and I think I did very well to make up both General Pinckney and Clementina, don't you, Joe? And when a girl in the laundry put down a hot iron on my hand this afternoon, I was all the way home making up that story about the Welsh rabbit. You're not angry, are you, Joe? Isn't it good that I got the job? You have sold your pictures to that man. What made you ever suspect that I wasn't giving music lessons to Clementina?" "I didn't," said Joe, "until tonight. You see, I sent up this bandage and oil from the engine-room this afternoon for a girl upstairs who had her hand burned with an iron. I got a job in that laundry 2 weeks ago." "And then you didn't—" "The man from Peoria," said Joe, "and General Pinckney are both creations of the same art, but you would not call it either painting or music. And then
They both laughed, and Joe began, "When one loves one's art, no service seems—" But Delia stopped him with her hand on his lips. "No," she said, "just when one loves." Shoes. John de Graffenreid Atwood led a very easy and lazy life in Coralio. He came to work there trying to forget Rosine. One day Johnny's servant brought the mail and put it on the table. Johnny leaned back from his hammock and touched the 4 or 5 letters. Billy Keogh was sitting at the table chopping lazily with a paper knife at the legs of a centipede. Johnny was in a bad mood. "Every day's the same," he said. "Fools write and want to get information about this country. They ask about growing fruit and how to get big money doing nothing. Some of them don't even send stamps for a reply. They think a consul has nothing to do but write letters. Open those envelopes for me and see what they want." Keogh drew his chair to the table with a smile on his pink face and began to open the letters. 4 of them were from people in different parts of the United States who thought that the consul at Coralio would give them information. They sent long lists of questions about the climate, products, laws, business chances in the country where the consul had the honour of representing his country. "Answer their letters, please, Billy," said the lazy man. "Just a few words and tell them to have a good look at my latest reports. Sign my name. I'm going to sleep a little." "Don't snore," said Keogh friendlily. "And I'll do everything for you. You have to ask someone to help you." "Wake up a minute. Here's a letter from your own town, Dalesburg." "Really?" murmured Johnny, almost without interest. "What's it about?" "Postmaster writes," explained Keogh. "Says a citizen of the town wants to know some facts and a piece of advice from you. This man wants to come here and open a shoe shop. He wants to know if it's possible." Johnny laughed loudly. Keogh laughed too. "Ha ha! Oh, my lord!" exclaimed the consul. "Shoe shop! What will be their next idea? Overcoat factory, I think. Do you know, Billy, how many people of our 3,000 citizens ever put on shoes?" Keogh thought a little. "Let's see. There's you and me. And don't count me," said Johnny. "I'm not going to buy new shoes now." "But sometime you'll buy them," went on Keogh. "And there's Goodwin and Blanchard, and that Italian who works for the Banana Company, and some other people." "Yeah," agreed Johnny. "There are only about 20 people out of the 3,000 who ever put shoes on their feet. Oh, yes, Coralio is just the town for a shop that doesn't need buyers. I think old Patterson is joking. He always liked a good joke. Write him a letter, Billy. I'll tell you what to write." Keogh took his pen and wrote the following letter. "Mr. Patterson, Dalesburg, Allah. Dear Sir, I received your letter and want to inform you that I think this town is the best place for a shoe shop. 3,000 people live here, and there is not a single shoe shop. In fact, there are a lot of people here now who don't have shoes at all. It is a good chance for you. Yours truly, John de Graffenreid Atwood, U.S. Consul at Coralio. P.S. Hello, old chap. How's life? What would our country do without you and me? I'll send you a green parrot and some bananas. Johnny." It's necessary to write this postscript. Reading it, old Patterson won't mind the official tone. Now, Billy, send someone to the post office. The Ariadne takes the mail out tomorrow. Evenings at Coralio never differed. People walked about without any aim, speaking and smoking. By 9 o'clock, the streets were almost empty. The consul's life saw no changes either. In the evening he would become sad and would tell Kyo the story of his ended love. Every night Kyo would listen carefully and be ready to say the same words to calm down his friend. "But don't you think," Johnny usually said at the end of his story, "that I'm still thinking about that girl? I've forgotten her. Everything is over long ago." "Yes, I know," Kyo would answer. "You really have forgotten her. She was not right to listen to those silly remarks of Dink Pawson about you." Pink Dawson, poor man, that's what he was. The members of his family were nobody. Everybody in Alabama knows our family. Kyo had heard this story 300 times. "But I never think of that girl any more, do I, Billy?" "Not for a minute, my boy," would repeat Billy. In a day or two, both of them had forgotten the letter from Dalesburg. But on the 26th of July, an unexpected thing happened. The Andador, the fruit ship that often visited Corelio, came into port. There were a lot of people on the beach who gathered and watched how the quarantine doctor was doing his work. An hour later, Billy Kyo appeared in the consulate smiling from ear to ear. "Have you heard the news?" he said to Johnny, who was in his favourite hammock. "No," said Johnny lazily. "Our shoe-shop man has come," said Kyo, "with a large luggage. I'm sure when this man finds out the truth, he'll be very disappointed." "I can't believe," Johnny said, "that anybody took our letter seriously." $4,000 stock of goods," exclaimed Kyo. "It was worth seeing that old fool on the beach. You ought to be there." "Are you serious, Billy?" asked the counsel. "Completely. But he's brought his daughter with him. She is really beautiful." "Go on," said Johnny, "and will you please stop laughing?" "His name is Hemstetter," continued Billy. "He's— Hey, what's the matter with you?" Johnny jumped out of his hammock. "Get up, you fool," he said. "It's Rosine and her father." "What a fool old Patterson is! Get up and help me." Kyo rose. "I didn't know if it was your girl until you spoke. First of all, we should find a good flat for them. Go and meet them, and I'll go to Goodwin's and ask Mrs. Goodwin if they can take them in." "Thank you, Billy," said the consul. "I knew I could rely on you." Kyo left for Goodwin's house. Johnny put on his coat and hat. Then he made his way to the beach. There he found Mr. Hemstetter and Rosine. Rosine was fresh and beautiful. She was looking around with interest. Her cheeks turned pink when she said hello to her old admirer. Mr. Hemstetter shook hands with Johnny. "I'm glad to see you, John," he said. "Let me thank you for your advice. I wanted to start a new business to get some money. I sold out everything and brought a great deal of the finest shoes in the north. It's a nice town, John. I hope I'll be successful here." Kyo came and said that Mrs. Goodwin was ready to let rooms to Mr. Hemstetter and his daughter. So Mr. Hemstetter and Rosine were brought there at once to have a good rest. That night the consul and Kyo had a serious talk. They tried to solve their problem. "Say them to go home," began Kyo. "I would," said Johnny after a pause, "but I haven't told you the truth, Billy." "What do you mean?" "I've told you hundreds of times that I had not thought about that girl." "You've told me about this 375 times," agreed Billy. "I lied. I never forgot her. I talked with Rosine. I made one thing clear. Do you remember that farmer guy who liked her?" "Dink Pawson?" "Pink Dawson. Well, she didn't like him, and she didn't believe his stories about me. And now I've a problem, Billy. I can lose everything because of that silly letter. If I send them home, I'll have to tell them the truth. I love her very much, but now, when she's here, I've lost her." "Well," said Keogh, "let them open the shop. I've done a great work today. I can buy 6 pairs. I've walked round the town, visited everybody, and explained the situation. They agreed to buy some pairs of shoes." "A dozen buyers," said Johnny. "And they have shoes for $4,000? This can't solve the problem. Go home, Billy, and leave me alone. I have to think." Keogh left. Johnny put several cigars on the table and made himself comfortable in his chair. When the morning came, he was still in the chair. Then he got up and went to take a bath, whistling carelessly. At 9 o'clock he went to a telegraph office and spent some time writing something on a blank. The result of this was the following telegram, which he signed and sent for $33. To Pinckney Dawson, Dalesburg, Alabama. A check for $100 will be sent to you with the next mail. Send me immediately 500 pounds dry cockleburs. I need them badly. Further orders likely. Hurry up. The Enchanted Profile. In New York there is an old, old hotel. You've seen pictures of it in the magazines. It was built many years ago. Soon the old hotel will be pulled down. At this hotel always stopped Mrs. Maggie Brown. Mrs. Brown was a bony woman of 60, dressed in the rustiest black, and carrying a handbag made of crocodile leather. She always stayed in a small parlour and bedroom at the top of the hotel at a rent of $2 a day. Maggie Brown was said to be the 3rd richest woman in the world, and every day many men who were the wealthiest brokers and businessmen of the city came to see the old lady with handbag, asking her to borrow them 6 millions or so. The stenographer and typist of the Acropolis Hotel, for that was its name, was Miss Ida Bates. She was a holdover from the Greek classics. There wasn't a flaw in her looks. She had black hair and always wore a neat white blouse. She sometimes did a little typing for me, and, as she refused to take the money in advance, she began to look on me as a friend and protégé. She was kind and good-natured, and no one ever dared to behave in a bad way in her presence. All the staff of the Acropolis Hotel, from the owner, who lived in Vienna, to the head porter, would come to her help in a moment. One day I passed the room where Miss Bates worked and saw in her place a black-haired person typing with her forefingers. The next day I went on a 2 weeks' holiday. When I returned, I walked through the hall of the Acropolis Hotel and saw Miss Bates, as kind and flawless as ever, just putting the cover on her machine. The hour for closing had come, but she asked me to sit for a few minutes in her room. Miss Bates explained her absence and return to the Acropolis Hotel in the following words. "Of course, you know about Maggie Brown, who stops here. Well, she is worth $40 million. She lives in Jersey in a $10 flat. She always has more ready cash than a dozen businessmen, and she is very popular in that part of town where they worship the golden calf. Well, about 2 weeks ago, Mrs. Brown stopped at my door and looked at me for 10 minutes. I was sitting with my side to her. However, I always see everything around me. That evening, at knocking-off time, she sent for me to come up to her apartment. And though I expected to have to type about 2,000 words of different business papers, I went to her all the same. Well, I was certainly surprised. Old Maggie Brown had turned human.
"Child," she said, "you are the most beautiful creature I ever saw in my life. I want you to give up your work and come and live with me. I have no relatives," she said, "except a husband and 2 sons, but I don't communicate with any of them. They are extravagant burdens on a hard-working woman. I want you to be a daughter to me. They say I am stingy and mean, and the papers print lies about my doing my own cooking and washing. It is a lie," she went on. "I give my washing away, except the handkerchiefs and stockings and collars and things like that. I have $40 million in cash and stocks and bonds. I'm a lonely old woman, and I need a friend. You are the most beautiful creature I ever saw," she said. "Will you come and live with me? I'll show them whether I can spend money or not." Well, of course I agreed, and, to tell you the truth, I began to like old Maggie. It wasn't all because of the 40 millions and what she could do for me. I was lonely too. Everybody must have somebody to whom they can explain about the pain in their left shoulder and how fast patent leather shoes wear out, and you cannot talk about such things to men you meet in hotels. Well, I gave up my work at the hotel and went to live with Mrs. Brown. I certainly made an impression on her. She would look at me for half an hour at a time when I was sitting, reading, or looking at the magazines. Once I said to her, "Do I remind you of some relative or friend of your childhood, Mrs. Brown? You so often look at me very closely." "You have a face," she said, "exactly like a dear friend of mine, the best friend I ever had. But I like you for yourself, child, too." And what do you think she did? She took me to a fashionable dressmaker and told her to fit me out. It was a rush order, and the dressmaker locked the front door and put the whole force to work. Then we moved to, where do you think? The Hotel Bonton. We had a 6-room apartment, and it cost $100 a day. I saw the bill. I began to love the old lady, and then, when my dresses began to come, oh, I won't tell you about them, you couldn't understand, and I began to call her Aunt Maggie. Then, one day, Aunt Maggie told me that she wanted to give me a reception at the Hotel Bonton. "But, Aunt Maggie," I said to her, "the Bonton is one of the most fashionable hotels in the city, and it's hard to get all those important people together when you are not used to it." "Don't worry about that, child. I don't send invitation. I give orders. I have 50 guests here that couldn't be brought together again at any reception. They are men, of course, and all of them either have borrowed or are going to borrow from me. Some of their wives won't come, but a good many will." Well, it's a pity you weren't at that reception. The dinner set was all gold. There were about 40 men and 8 ladies present besides Aunt Maggie and me. Aunt Maggie wore a new black silk dress, and my dress. It was all handmade, and it cost $300. The men were all bald-headed or grey-haired, and they talked about 3 cents on the cotton crop. On the left of me there was a banker, and on my right there was a young man who said he was a newspaper artist. After the dinner was over, Mrs. Brown and I went up to our apartment. We had to move through a crowd of reporters all the way. That is one of the things money does for you. Say, do you happen to know a newspaper artist named Lathrop? He was very nice to me at dinner. I suppose he believed I was to inherit some of Aunt Maggie's money. I do not remember what newspaper he works on. Well, all right. When we got upstairs, Mrs. Brown telephoned for the bill at once. It came, and it was $600.
Aunt Maggie fainted. I put her on a sofa and unbuttoned her dress. "Child," she said, when she recovered, "what was it? A raise of rent or the income tax?" "Just a little dinner," I said. "Nothing to worry about." "But do you know what Aunt Maggie did?" We left that Hotel Bonton in a hurry at 9 o'clock the next morning. We went to live in a house which no one would call fashionable. She rented one room that had water on the floor below and light on the floor above. After we moved in, all you could see in the room were a lot of expensive dresses and a small gas stove. Aunt Maggie had suddenly become stingy, and that with $40 million. Well, 3 days of that light housekeeping was enough for me. Aunt Maggie was as loving as she always had been to me. She hardly let me go out of her sight. But 75 cents a day was the limit she set. We cooked our own meals in the room. There I was, wearing a $150 dress, preparing a 15-cent dinner on a one-burner gas stove. On the third day I gave it up. I went to the closet and put on the cheapest dress that Mrs. Brown had brought for me. "Mrs. Brown," I said to her, "I'm going away. I do not worship money, but there are some things I cannot stand. They say you have $40 million. Well, you will never have any less. And I was beginning to like you," I said. Well, Aunt Maggie began to cry. She said she would move into a better room with a 2-burner stove and water. "I spent a lot of money, child," she said. "We must economize for a while. You are the most beautiful creature I ever saw, and I don't want you to leave me." But I went straight back to the Acropolis Hotel and asked for my old job, and got it. How are you getting on with your stories? Do you ever have them illustrated? And by the way, don't you know a newspaper artist called Lathrop? Oh, I've already asked you that question before. After all, maybe he wasn't thinking of the money I would get from old Mrs. Brown. If I only knew what newspaper he worked on. The sound of footsteps came from the doorway. Ida Bates saw who it was and turned pink. "Will you excuse me?" she said to me. It's Mr. Lathrop. I wonder if it really wasn't the money he thought of." Of course, I was invited to their wedding. After the ceremony, I dragged Lathrop aside. "You're an artist," I said, "and didn't you understand why Maggie Brown liked Miss Bates so much? Let me show you." The bride wore a simple white dress which was as beautiful as the costumes of the ancient Greeks. I took some leaves from one of the decorative wreaths in the little parlour and made a crown of them. Then I put them on Ida's shining hair and made her turn her profile to her husband. "Good God," he said, "isn't Ida's head exactly like the lady's head on the silver dollar?" The Gift of the Magi. $1.87. That was all. And 60 cents were in pennies. Pennies saved 1 and 2 at a time by bargaining with the grocer and the greengrocer and the butcher. 3 times Della counted it. $1.87. And the next day would be Christmas. There was really nothing to do but sit down on the old little sofa and cry. So Della did it. Which proves the statement that life is made up of sobs and smiles. But there are more sobs than smiles in it. While the mistress of the home is crying, let's take a look at the home. A furnished flat at $8 per week. In the hall below there was a letterbox into which no letter would go. But there was a card with the name of Mr. James Dillingham Young. But whenever Mr. James Dillingham Young came home and reached his flat above, he was called Jim, and met by Mrs. James Dillingham Young, already introduced to you as Della, which is all very good. Della finished her cry and touched her cheeks with the powder puff. She stood by the window and looked out dully at a grey cat walking a grey fence in a grey backyard. Tomorrow would be Christmas Day, and she had only $1.87 with which to buy Jim a present. She had been saving every penny she could for months, and that was the result. $20 a week is not a big sum. Only $1.87 to buy a present for Jim, her Jim. She had spent many happy hours planning for something nice for him. Something nice, something worth Jim. Suddenly she moved quickly from the window and stood before the mirror. Her eyes were shining brightly, but her face had lost its colour within 20 seconds. She pulled down her hair and let it fall to its full length. Now, there were 2 treasures of James Dillingham Young's, and they were very proud of them. One was Jim's gold watch that had been his father's and his grandfather's. The other was Della's hair. So now Della's beautiful hair fell about her, shining like a cascade of brown waters. And then she did it up again nervously and quickly. Once she hesitated for a moment and stood still while a tear or two fell on the old red carpet. She put on her old brown jacket. She put on her old brown hat. Then she ran out of the door and down the stairs to the street. At the place where she stopped, the sign read, Madame Sofroni, hair goods of all kinds. Della ran upstairs and collected herself, breathing hard. Madame was large and too white. "Will you buy my hair?" asked Della. "I buy hair," said Madame. "Take your hat off and let's have a look at it." The brown cascade fell down. $20, said Madame, taking the hair with a skilful hand. "Give it to me quick," said Della. Oh, and the next 2 hours passed by on rosy wings. She visited many shops looking for Jim's present. She found it at last. It surely had been made for Jim and no one else. There was no other like it in any of the shops, and she had turned all of them inside out. It was a gold chain, simple, but looking very expensive. It was even worth the watch. As soon as she saw it, she knew that it must be Jim's. They took $21 for it, and she went home with 87 cents. With that chain, Jim might take his watch out of his pocket in any company. When Della came home, she got out her curling irons and lighted the gas and went to work repairing her hairdo. It was such a difficult task. 40 minutes later, her head was covered with little, beautiful curls that made her look wonderfully like a schoolboy. She looked at her reflection in the mirror critically. "If Jim doesn't kill me," she said to herself, "before he takes a second look at me, he'll say I look like a chorus girl. But what could I do? What could I do with $1.87? At 7 o'clock the coffee was made, and the frying pan was on the stove, hot and ready to cook the chops. Jim was never late. Della took the chain in her hand and sat on the corner of the table near the door. Then she heard his step on the stair and turned white for just a moment. She usually said little prayers about the simplest everyday things, and now she said, "Please, God, make him think I am still pretty." The door opened, and Jim came in and closed it. He looked very serious. Poor fellow, he was only 22 and had a family. He needed a new overcoat, and he was without gloves. Jim didn't move. He looked at Della. There was an expression in his eyes that she could not read, and it frightened her. It was not anger, nor surprise, nor horror. He just looked at her with that strange expression on his face. Della came up to him. "Jim, darling," she cried, "don't look at me that way. I had my hair cut off and sold it because I wanted to buy you a Christmas present. I just had to do it. My hair grows awfully fast. Say, Merry Christmas, Jim, and let's be happy. I have a very nice present for you." "You've cut off your hair?" asked Jim. "Cut it off and sold it," said Della. "Don't you like me just as well? I'm me without my hair." Jim looked about the room. "You say your hair is gone?" he said foolishly. "You needn't look for it," said Della. "It's sold. I tell you, sold and gone too. It's Christmas. Be good to me. Maybe the hairs of my head were numbered," she went on seriously, "but nobody could ever count my love for you. Shall I put the chops on, Jim?" Jim woke up, took a package out of his pocket, and put it upon the table. "Don't make any mistake, Dell," he said, "about me. No haircut could make me like my wife any less, but if you open that package, you may understand my shock." White fingers tore at the string and paper, and she screamed for joy, and then, all of a sudden, she began to cry. For there lay the combs. The set of combs that Della had wanted very much, looking at them in a shop window. They were expensive combs, she knew it, and she didn't hope to have them. And now they were hers, but her hair was gone. She took them and smiled through tears and said, "My hair grows fast, Jim." And then Della jumped up. Jim had not yet seen his beautiful present. She held it out to him in her open hand. "Isn't it nice, Jim? I hunted all over town to find it. You'll have to look at the time 100 times a day now. Give me your watch. I want to see how it looks on it." Instead of doing this, Jim lay down on the sofa and put his hands under the back of his head and smiled. "Dell," said he, "let's put our Christmas presents away. They are too nice to be used just at the present. I sold the watch to get the money to buy your combs, and now you may put the chops on." The Magi were wise men, and their gifts were wise, and these two children most unwisely sacrificed their treasures for each other. But their gifts are the wisest. They are the Magi. The Purple Dress. Maida was a girl with the big brown eyes and dark hair. She worked in the beehive store. Once she said to Grace, another girl who worked with her, "I'm going to have a purple dress for Thanksgiving." "Oh, are you?" said Grace, putting away some gloves. "I'll have a red one. Red is more fashionable now, and the men seem to like it." "I like purple best," said Maida, "and old Schlegel has promised to make it for $8. It's going to be lovely." "You think that Mr. Ramsay likes purple? I heard him say yesterday he thought some of the dark shades of red were very beautiful." "I don't care," said Maida. "I prefer purple, and those who don't like it can take the other side of the street." Maida had saved $18 after 8 months of economy, and she had bought everything for the purple dress and paid Schlegel $4 on the making of it. On the day before Thanksgiving she would have enough to pay the remaining $4, and she'll have a new dress for the holiday. The owner of the store always gave a Thanksgiving dinner to his workers. The dinner was given in the store on one of the long tables in the middle of the room. The turkeys and other good things were brought in the back way from the restaurant on the corner, and always at the Thanksgiving dinners, Mr. Ramsay— Mr. Ramsay! He's a very important figure. He was the head clerk. He adored healthy lifestyle. Every one of the 10 girls in the store had dreams every night of becoming Mrs. Ramsay, because the next year the old owner was going to make him a partner. Mr. Ramsay was master of ceremonies at the dinners. They also had 2 Italians to play music and have a little dance in the store. And there were 2 dresses to charm Ramsay, one purple and the other red. Of course, the other 8 girls were going to have dresses too, but they didn't count. Grace had saved her money too. She was going to buy her dress ready-made. The night before Thanksgiving came, Maida hurried home, happy with the thoughts of the evening. Her thoughts were of purple. She knew she would look lovely in purple, and, for the 1000th time, she said to herself that it was purple Mr. Ramsay said he liked, and not red. She was going home first to get the $4, and then she was going to pay Schlegel and take her dress home. Grace lived in the same house. She rented the room above Maida's. At home there was much noise and confusion. The landlady was shouting loudly at Grace. Then Grace came down to her room crying with red eyes. "She says I've got to get out," said Grace. "I have to pay her $4. She locked the door and I can't go anywhere else. I haven't got any money." "You had some yesterday," said Maida. "I spent it on my dress," explained Grace. "I hoped she'd wait till next week." She started crying again. So Maida gave her $4 to Grace. She had to. "Thank you, darling," cried Grace happily. "I'll pay her, and then I'm going to try on my dress. It's beautiful. Come up and look at it. I'll pay the money back, $1 a week." Thanksgiving. The dinner was to be at noon. At 11:45, Grace came into Maida's room. She looked charming. Red was her colour. Maida sat by the window in her old clothes. "Why aren't you dressed yet?" exclaimed Grace. "My dress is not finished," said Maida. "I'm not going to the dinner." "Oh, that's too bad. I'm awfully sorry, Maida. Why don't you put on anything and come along?" "I was going to put on my purple," said Maida. "If I can't have it, I won't go at all. Hurry up or you'll be late. You look awfully nice in red." At her window, Maida sat through the long morning and passed the time of dinner at the store. In her mind she could see what was happening there. At 4 in the afternoon she slowly walked to Schlegel's shop and told him she could not pay the $4. "God!" cried Schlegel angrily. "Take it away! It's ready! Pay me when you can! Take it away!" Maida was happy. She thanked him 1,000,000 times and hurried away with her dress. As she left the shop, it started raining, but she smiled and didn't feel it. At 5 o'clock she went out upon the street wearing her purple dress. The rain had increased, and people were hurrying home and to cars hiding under umbrellas. Maida didn't have an umbrella. She had her purple dress, and she walked happily through the storm. Someone turned a corner and blocked her way. She looked up and saw Mr. Ramsay's eyes. He was looking at her with admiration. "Oh, Miss Maida," said he, "you look wonderful in your new dress. I was disappointed you had not come to our dinner. It's so healthy to walk in the rain. May I walk with you?" And Maida turned pink and sneezed. The Cop and the Anthem. Soapy lived on a bench in Madison Square. A dead leaf fell on the bench to warn him that the winter was coming. For years he had spent winter at Blackwell's prison, and now it was time to get to prison again. He covered himself with 3 newspapers that night, but they didn't keep him warm. So the island where prison was situated became very attractive. There were many easy ways to get to prison. The most pleasant was to have a good dinner at some expensive restaurant and not pay for it, and be handed to a policeman. The court will do the rest. Soapy left his bench and walked towards the corner of Broadway and Fifth Avenue. Soapy was sure he looked all right. He was shaven, and his coat was clean. If he could reach a table in the restaurant unnoticed, success would be his. His upper part, that would show above the table, would raise no doubt in the waiter. A roasted duck, thought Soapy, would be nice, with a bottle of good wine, a cup of coffee, and a cigar. $1 for the cigar would be enough. The meal would leave him happy for the journey to his winter home. But as Soapy entered the restaurant, the head waiter saw his shabby trousers and shoes. Strong hands turned him about and helped to get out of the restaurant. Soapy turned off Broadway. It seemed that his way to the island was not going to be pleasant. He had to think of some other way. At a corner of 6th Avenue he saw a brightly lit shop window. Soapy took a stone and threw it through the glass. People came running round the corner, and there was a policeman among them. Soapy stood still, with his hands in his pockets, and smiled. "Where is the man that has done that?" asked the officer excitedly. Don't you think it's me?" said Soapy friendly, as a person who greets good fortune. The policeman did not believe him. Men who break windows do not stand still. They run away. The policeman saw a man halfway down the block running to catch a car. He ran after that man. Soapy walked along twice, unsuccessful. On the opposite side of the street there was a restaurant that was not so expensive. Its prices were not high. Soapy entered it with no trouble. At a table he sat and ordered beefsteak, doughnuts, and pie. And then he told the waiter that he had no money at all. "Now get busy and call a cop," said Soapy, "and don't keep a gentleman waiting." "No cop for you," said the waiter. "Hey, con!" Another waiter came up. They threw Soapy out of the restaurant. He got to his feet and beat the dust from his clothes. Arrest seemed but a rosy dream. The island seemed very far away. A policeman who stood before a drugstore 2 doors away laughed and walked down the street. Soapy travelled 5 blocks before he could try again. A young woman was standing before a shop window and looked with interest at the goods. And 2 yards from the window there stood a large policeman. Soapy went to the young woman. He made eyes at her and smiled. With half an eye, Soapy saw that the policeman was watching him closely. The young woman moved away a few steps. Soapy followed her, raised his hat, and said, "Hello, don't you want to walk with me?" The policeman was still looking. The young woman had only to give him a sign, and Soapy would be on his way to his dream. The woman turned to him, and stretching out a hand, caught Soapy's coat sleeve. "Sure, Mike," she said joyfully. "Let's have a walk. I didn't speak to you first because of the cop." With the young woman, Soapy walked past the policeman. The island seemed out of reach. At the next corner, he left his companion and ran away. He appeared in the district where the lightest streets and music are found by night. Women in furs and men in overcoats moved cheerfully in the winter air. Soapy felt a sudden fear. He thought that something prevented him from arrest. The thought brought a little of panic upon him. He began to behave like a drunkard. He danced, shouted, and sang songs in his harsh voice. The policeman turned his back to Soapy and remarked to a passer-by, "The students are celebrating tonight, noisy but no harm. We've instructions to let them be." Soapy was desperate. Would never a policeman lay hands on him? He buttoned his thin coat as the wind became colder. In a cigar store, he saw a well-dressed man lighting a cigar. His silk umbrella stood near the door. Soapy stepped inside, took the umbrella, and walked away slowly. The man at the cigar light followed him quickly. "My umbrella," he said sternly. "Oh, is it?" said Soapy. "Well, why don't you call a policeman? I took it. Your umbrella. Why don't you call a cop? There stands one on the corner." The man slowed his steps. Soapy stopped, feeling that luck would run away from him. The policeman looked at them curiously. "Of course," said the man. "That is, you know how these mistakes occur. If it's your umbrella, I hope you'll excuse me. I took it this morning in a restaurant. I hope you'll—" "Of course it's mine," said Soapy. The man left. Soapy walked eastward. He threw the umbrella away. At last he reached one of the avenues to the east. He looked in the direction of Madison Square, because there was his home. But on an unusually quiet corner, Soapy came to an old church. Through the dirty windows a soft light was seen. The organ played an anthem. Soapy listened to sweet music. The moon was above. The air was full of music. There was a wonderful change in his soul. He thought with horror about all his life, unhappy days, dead hopes, and low motives that made up his existence. And his heart responded to his new mood. He would change his life. He would make a man of himself again. There was time. He was quite young yet. This sweet music had set up a revolution in him. Tomorrow he would go into the downtown district and find work. A fur importer had once offered him a place as a driver. He would find him tomorrow and ask for work. He would be somebody in the world. He would— Soapy felt a hand on his arm. He looked quickly around into the broad face of a policeman. "What are you doing here?" asked the officer. "Nothing," said Soapy. "Then come along," said the policeman. 3 months on the island," said the judge in the police court the next morning. The Last Leaf. In a quiet part of the city west of Washington Square, the streets have gone wild. They turn in different directions. This part of the city is called Greenwich Village, and to old Greenwich Village the painters came to live. Here they found rooms they liked, with good light and at low cost. Sue and Johnsy lived at the top of a 3-story building. One of these young women came from Maine, the other from California. They had met at a restaurant on English Street. There they discovered that they liked the same kind of art, the same kind of food, and the same kind of clothes. So they decided to live and work together. That was in the spring. Toward winter, a cold stranger entered Greenwich Village. No one could see him. He walked around touching one person here and another there with his cold fingers. He was a bad illness. Doctors called him pneumonia. Mr. Pneumonia was not a nice old gentleman. A nice old gentleman would not hurt a weak little woman from California. But Mr. Pneumonia touched Johnsy with his cold fingers. She lay on her bed almost without moving, and she looked through the window at the wall of the house next to hers. One morning the busy doctor spoke to Sue alone in the hall, where Johnsy could not hear.
"She has 1 chance in 10, he said. "She has a chance if she wants to live. If people don't want to live, I can't do much for them. Your friend has decided that she is not going to get well. Is there something that is troubling her?" "She always wanted to paint the Bay of Naples," said Sue. "Paint? Not paint. Is there anything worth being troubled about? A man?"
"A man," said Sue.
"Is a man worth—" "No, doctor, there's not a man." "It is a weakness," said the doctor. "I will do all I can. But when a sick person begins to think that he's going to die, my work is half useless. Make her ask 1 question about the new style of winter clothes, and her chances will be better."
After the doctor's leaving, Sue went into the workroom to cry. Then she walked into Johnsy's room. She carried some of her painting materials, and she was singing. Johnsy lay there very thin and very quiet. Her face was turned toward the window. Sue stopped singing, thinking that Johnsy was asleep. Sue began to work. As she worked, she heard a low sound again and again. She went quickly to the bedside. Johnsy's eyes were wide open. She was looking out the window and counting. 12, she said, and a little later, 11, and then 10, and 9, and then 8, and 7, almost together. Sue looked out of the window. What was there to count? There was only the side wall of the next house, a short distance away. The wall had no windows. An old tree grew against the wall. The cold breath of winter had already touched it. Almost all its leaves had fallen from its dark branches. "What is it, dear?" 6, said Johnsy in a low voice. "They're falling faster now. 3 days ago there were almost 100. It was so hard to count them, but now it's easy. There goes another one. There are only 5 now." "5 what, dear? Tell your Sue." "Leaves on the tree. When the last one falls, I must go too. Didn't the doctor tell you?" "I've never heard of such a thing," said Sue. "It does not make any sense. What does an old tree have to do with you, or with your getting well? And you used to love that tree very much. The doctor told me about your chances for getting well. He told me this morning. He said you had very good chances. Try to eat a little now, and then I'll go back to work, and then I can sell my picture, and then I can buy something for you to eat." "You don't have to buy anything for me," said Johnsy. She still looked out the window. "There goes another. No, I don't want anything to eat. I want to see the last one fall before night. Then I'll go too." "Johnsy, dear," said Sue, "close your eyes and keep them shut. Promise me not to look out the window until I finish working. I must have this picture ready tomorrow. I need the light. I can't pull the curtains." "Couldn't you work in the other room?" asked Johnsy. "I'd rather be here by you," said Sue, "and I don't want you to look at those leaves." "Tell me as soon as you have finished," said Johnsy. She closed her eyes and lay still. "Because I want to see the last leaf fall. I've waited enough." "Try to sleep," said Sue. "I must call Behrman to come up here. I want to draw a man in this picture, and I'll make him look like Behrman. Don't try to move till I come back." Old Behrman was a painter who lived on the first floor of their house. He was past 60. He was not successful as a painter. He had always talked of painting a great picture, a masterpiece, but he had never started it. He got a little money by letting others to paint pictures of him. He drank too much. He still talked of his great masterpiece, and he believed that it was his special duty to help Sue and Johnsy. Sue found him in his dark room. She told him about Johnsy and the leaves. She said that she was afraid that Johnsy would die. Old Behrman became very angry with such an idea.
"What?" he cried. "Do people die because leaves drop off a tree? I've not heard of such a thing. No, I will not come up and sit while you make a picture of me. Why do you let her think such a thing? Poor little Johnsy."
"She's very ill and weak," said Sue. "Very well, Mr. Behrman, if you do not want to sit for me, you needn't. But I think you're just a wicked old thing."
"You're just like a woman," yelled Behrman. "Who said I will not sit? Go on. Some day I will paint a masterpiece, and we'll all go away."
Johnsy was sleeping when they went upstairs. Sue pulled the curtains to the window and took Behrman to the other room. In there they looked out the window fearfully at the tree. Then they looked at each other for a moment without speaking. A cold rain was falling. When Sue woke from an hour's sleep the next morning, she found Johnsy with wide-open eyes looking at the curtain which covered the window.
"Open the curtains. I want to see,"
she said in a whisper. Sue obeyed, but there still was one leaf. It was the last leaf on the tree, still dark green in the middle, but with yellow edges.
"It is the last one," said Johnsy. "I thought it would fall during the night. I heard the wind, and it will fall today, and I shall die at the same time."
"Dear, dear," said Sue, "think of me if you won't think of yourself. What would I do?" But Johnsy did not answer. The day passed by, and even through the darkness of the evening they could see the lonely leaf against the wall. And then, with the coming of the night, the north wind began to blow fiercely, and the rain beat against the windows. The next morning came. The leaf was still there. Johnsy lay for a long time looking at it, and then she called to Sue, who was warming up her chicken soup over the gas stove. "I've been a bad girl, Sue," said Johnsy. "Something has made that last leaf stay there to show me how bad I was. It is a sin to want to die. You may bring me a little soup now and some milk, and... No, bring me a hand mirror first, and then pack some pillows about me. I will sit up and watch you cook." An hour later she said, "Sue, some day I hope to paint the Bay of Naples." The doctor came in the afternoon, and Sue had an excuse to go into the hall as he left. 50-50, said the doctor, taking Sue's thin, shaking hand in his. You'll win with good care. And now I must see another man downstairs. His name is Berman. He's an artist, I think. Pneumonia, too. He's an old, weak man, and there's no hope for him. He goes to the hospital today to be made more comfortable." The next day the doctor said to Sue, "She is out of danger. You've won. Good food and care now. That's all." And that afternoon Sue came to the bed where Johnsy lay, knitting a blue woolen scarf. "I've something to tell you," she said. "Mr. Berman died of pneumonia today in the hospital. He was ill only 2 days. He was found on the morning of the first day in his room downstairs, helpless with pain. His shoes and clothing were wet through. They didn't know where he had been on such an awful night. And then they found a lantern, still lighted, and a ladder. They also found some brushes and a palette with green and yellow colours mixed on it. Look out the window, dear, at the last leaf on the wall. Didn't it surprise you that it never moved when the wind blew? Ah, darling, it's Berman's masterpiece. He painted it there the night that the last leaf fell." The Love-philtre of Ikey Schoenstein. The Blue Light Drugstore is downtown where the distance between 2 streets is shortest. The Blue Light thinks that pharmacy is a serious thing. If you ask it for painkiller, it will not give you a sweet. The Blue Light does not like the usage of modern technologies. All drugs here are handmade. To this day, pills are made behind its tall prescription desk and sold in little round pill boxes. Ikey Schoenstein was the night clerk of the Blue Light, and a friend of his customers. The druggist is a counsellor, a confessor, an adviser. Therefore, Ikey's figure was well known, and his advice and notice were much needed. Ikey rented a room and had breakfast at Mrs. Riddle's 2 blocks away from the drugstore. Mrs. Riddle had a daughter named Rosie, and Ikey loved Rosie very much. All his thoughts were about her, but Ikey was shy, and his dreams never came true because of his fears. Behind his counter he was a superior being, knowing everything about drugs, but outside he was a weak person in bad clothes, dirty with chemicals. His problem was Chunk McGowan. Mr. McGowan was also in love with Rosie, but he was more successful than Ikey. At the same time he was Ikey's friend and customer, and often came to the Blue Light Drug Store to have a bruise printed with iodine after a pleasant evening. One afternoon Mr. McGowan appeared and sat silently upon the stool. "Ikey," said he, when his friend sat opposite, "listen carefully. I need some drugs. I hope you have them." Ikey looked at Mr. McGowan's face, but didn't find bruises he usually had. "Take your coat off," he ordered. "I guess already that you've been stuck in the ribs with a knife. I have many times told you those Dagos would kill you one day." Mr. McGowan smiled. "Not them," he said. "Not any Dagos. But you are right, the problem is under my coat near my ribs. Ikey, Rosie and me are going to run away and get married together." Ikey was disappointed. "That is," Mr. McGowan continued, "if she doesn't change her mind until the time comes. We decided to get away 2 weeks ago, but one day she says she will. The same evening she says no. We've agreed on tonight, but it's 5 hours till the time, and I'm afraid she'll change her mind again." "You said you wanted drugs," remarked Ikey. "I want everything to be all right tonight," he said. "I've got a little flat in Harlem already, with flowers on the table and a kettle ready to boil, and I've asked the clergyman to wait for us at his house at 9:30. It's got to come off." "I don't see then yet," said Ikey shortly, "why you talk of drugs or what I can do about it." "Old man Riddle doesn't like me a little bit," went on the visitor. "For a week he hasn't let Rosie step outside the door with me. I'm making $20 a week, and she'll never be sorry for getting married to me." "You will excuse me, Chunk," said Ikey. "I'm very busy. I must make a prescription, because a customer will come soon for it." "Say," said Mr. McGowan, looking up suddenly, "say, Ikey, isn't there a drug of some kind that'll make a girl like you better if you give it to her?" "I thought," went on Chunk hopefully, "that if I could give such a drug to Rosie when I see her at supper tonight, it might help us to escape. I need the drug to work just for a couple of hours." "When are you going to run away?" asked Ikey. "At 9 o'clock, said Mr. McGowan. "Supper is at 7. At 8, Rosie goes to bed with a headache. At 9, I go under her window and help her down the fire escape. We've got to make it early. It's all very easy, if Rosie doesn't change her mind. Can you give me such a drug, Ikey?" Ikey Schoenstein rubbed his nose slowly. "Chunk," said he, "I'll give it to you, and you know how it makes Rosie think of you." Ikey went behind the prescription desk. He took 2 sleeping pills and crushed them to powder. He handed the drug to Chunk McGowan, telling him to put it in water if possible, and received the hearty thanks of his friend. Then he sent a note to Mr. Riddle and informed him about the plans of Mr. McGowan and Rosie. Mr. Riddle was a fat man, and he was quick to act. "Thank you very much," he said briefly to Ikey. "The lazy Irish loafer. My own room's just above Rosie's. I'll just go up there myself after supper and wait with the gun. If he comes in my backyard, he'll go away in an ambulance instead of a bridal chaise." Ikey felt that he had done his best. All night in the Blue Light Drug Store he waited for news of the tragedy, but none came. At 8 o'clock in the morning, the day clerk arrived, and Ikey hurried to Mrs. Riddle's to find the news. As he stepped out of the store, he met Chunk McGowan, who jumped out from a passing streetcar and grasped his hand. He looked very happy. "We've done it! Rosie is up at the flat now. She cooked eggs this morning in the blue kimono. Lord, how lucky I am! You must come up to our place some day, Ikey, and have dinner with us. I've got a job down near the bridge, and that's where I'm going now." The drug?" stammered Ikey. "Oh, the drug you gave me," said Chunk, smiling. "Well, it was this way. I sat down at the supper table last night at Riddle's and looked at Rosie and said to myself, 'Chunk, don't do this to the girl.' And then I looked at another person present who, I said to myself, should like his future son-in-law. So, when I had the chance, I put the drug in old man Riddle's coffee. See?" The Romance of Busy Broker. Pitcher, a clerk in the office of Harvey Maxwell, broker, looked with some interest and surprise at his chief, who entered at 9:30 in company with his young lady stenographer. With a lively "Good morning, Pitcher," Maxwell moved quickly to his desk, and then got himself busy with the letters and telegrams waiting there for him. The young lady had been Maxwell's stenographer for a year. She was beautiful. She wore no chains, bracelets, or lockets. She had not the air of being about to accept an invitation to luncheon. Her dress was grey and plain, but it fitted her figure well. In her neat black turban hat was the gold-green wing of parrot. On this morning she was softly and shyly shining. Her eyes were bright, her cheeks were pink, her expression was happy. Pitcher, still curious, noticed a difference in her behaviour this morning. Instead of going straight into the next room where her desk was, she walked without any aim in the outer office. Once she moved over by Maxwell's desk, near enough for him to notice her. The machine sitting at that desk was no longer a man. It was a busy New York broker, moved by buzzing wheels and uncoiling springs. "Well, what is it? Anything?" asked Maxwell sharply. His open mail lay like snow on his crowded desk. He looked at her impatiently. "Nothing," answered the stenographer, moving away with a little smile. "Mr. Pitcher," she said to the clerk, "did Mr. Maxwell say anything yesterday about hiring another stenographer?" "He did," answered Pitcher. "He told me to get another one. I turned to the agency yesterday afternoon and asked to send over somebody this morning. It's 9:45 o'clock, but no one has come yet." "I will do the work as usual, then," said the young lady, "until someone comes to fill the place." And she went to her desk at once and hung the black turban hat with the gold-green parrot wing in its usual place. This day was Harvey Maxwell's busy day. The telegraphic machine didn't stop for a moment. The desk telephone rang all the time. Men began to come into the office and call at him. Messenger boys ran in and out with messages and telegrams. The clerks in the office jumped about like sailors during a storm. On the exchange there were hurricanes and landslides and snowstorms and volcanoes, and those things were reproduced in miniature in the broker's office. Maxwell jumped from a telegraphic machine to phone, from desk to door. In the middle of this growing important stress, the broker suddenly saw a mass of golden hair under a fancy hat. There was a young lady, and Pitcher was there with her. "Lady from the stenographer's agency to see about the position," said Pitcher. Maxwell turned half around, with his hands full of papers and tape. "What position?" he asked with a frown. "Position of stenographer," said Pitcher. "You told me yesterday to call them up and ask them to send one over this morning." "You're losing your mind, Pitcher," said Maxwell. "Why should I have given you such instructions? Miss Leslie has worked perfectly during this year. The place is hers as long as she chooses to have it. There's no place open here, madam. Inform the agency, Pitcher, and don't bring any more of them in here." The young lady left the office. Pitcher found a moment to remark to the bookkeeper that the old man seemed to get more absent-minded every day of the world. The rush of business grew faster. On the floor there were half a dozen stocks in which Maxwell's customers were heavy investors. Orders to buy and sell were coming and going quickly. Some of his own holdings were in danger, and the man was working like some machine, going at full speed, accurate, never hesitating, with the right word and decision and act. Stocks, bonds, and securities. Here was a world of finance, and there was no room in it for the human world or the world of nature. Then the luncheon hour came nearer. Maxwell stood by his desk with his hands full of telegrams, with a pen over his right ear, and his hair hanging in disorder over his forehead. His window was open, for the spring had brought a little warmth, and through the window there came a delicate, sweet odour of lilac. This odour belonged to Miss Leslie. It was her own, and hers only. The odour brought her vividly before him. The world of finance became suddenly smaller, and she was in the next room 20 steps away. "Well, I'll do it now," said Maxwell half aloud. "I'll ask her now. I wonder why I didn't do it long ago." He went quickly into the inner office. He came up to the desk of the stenographer. She looked up at him with a smile. Her cheeks turned pink, and her eyes were kind and frank. Maxwell leaned one elbow on her desk. "Miss Leslie," he began hurriedly, "I have only one free moment. I want to say something in that moment. Will you be my wife? I haven't had time to show my love to you, but I really do love you. Talk quick, please." "Oh, what are you talking about?" exclaimed the young lady. She rose to her feet and looked at him in surprise. Don't you understand?" said Maxwell. "I want you to marry me. I love you, Miss Leslie. I wanted to tell you it long ago. They're calling me for the phone now. Tell them to wait a minute, Pitcher. Won't you, Miss Leslie?" The stenographer acted very strangely. At first she seemed surprised. Then tears ran from her eyes, and then she smiled sunnily through them and put one of her arms lovingly round the broker's neck. "I know now," she said softly. "It's this old business that has driven everything else out of your head for a time. I was frightened at first. Don't you remember, Harvey? We were married last evening at 8 o'clock in the little church around the corner." $1,000. $1,000, repeated Lawyer Tolman solemnly, "and here is the money." Young Gillian took the thin package of new $50 notes.
"It's such an awkward sum of money," he said to his lawyer. "I don't know what to do with it. I know how I could spend $10,000. Even $50 would be less trouble."
"You heard your uncle's will," continued Lawyer Tolman. "I don't know if you paid attention to its details. I must remind you of one. You have to give us an account of the manner in which you spend this $1,000. I believe you will fulfill this wish of the late Mr. Gillian?"
"Certainly," replied the young man.
Gillian went to his club. There he found a friend of his who was known by the name of Old Bryson. Old Bryson was sitting in a corner of the room reading a book. When he saw Gillian, he sighed, laid down his book, and took off his glasses. "Hello, old Bryson," said Gillian. "I've a funny story to tell you." "I wish you would tell it to someone else," old Bryson said. "You know how I hate your stories."
"This is a better one than usual," said Gillian, "and I want to tell it to you. I've just come from my late uncle's lawyers. He's left me $1,000. Now, what can a man do with $1,000? "I thought," said old Bryson, "that the late Mr. Gillian was worth something like $500,000. "He was," Gillian agreed, "but he left all his money to a microbe. That is, part of it goes to a man who invents a new microbe, and the rest to establish a hospital that would do away with it again. There are 2 more people who got a ring, and $10 each, the butler and the housekeeper. His nephew gets $1,000.
"Any other heirs?" asked old Bryson.
"There's a Miss Hayden, a ward of my uncle, who lived in his house. She's a quiet girl, musical, the daughter of one of my uncle's friends. I forgot to say that she also got a ring and $10. Now really, Bryson, tell me what a fellow can do with $1,000.
Old Bryson smiled. $1,000, he said, means much or little. One man may buy a happy home with it. Another could send his wife south and save her life. $1,000 would buy milk for 100 babies during June, July, and August, and save 50 of their lives. It would pay for the education of an ambitious boy. A picture of Corot was sold for this sum at an auction yesterday. You could go to a little town and live happily for 2 years on $1,000. "Oh, Bryson, don't moralize," said Gillian. "I asked you to tell me what I could do with $1,000. "You?" said Bryson with a laugh. "Why, Bobby Gillian, there's only one thing you can do. You can buy a diamond necklace for Miss Laurier with the money and then go to the West and live on a sheep ranch." "Thanks," said Gillian, rising. That's exactly what I'll do. I wanted to spend the money in a lump because I have to account for it, and I hate itemizing." Gillian took a taxi and said to the driver, "The stage entrance of the Columbine Theatre." Miss Laurier was almost ready for her call at the performance when her dresser said that Mr. Gillian wanted to see her. "Let him in," she said. "Now, what is it, Bobby? I'm going on in 2 minutes." "Oh, I won't take more than 2 minutes," said Gillian. "What would you say if I give you $1,000 necklace?" "As you wish," replied Miss Laurier. "By the way, did you see the necklace Della Stacy wore last night? It cost $2,500. "Miss Laurier!" cried the call boy. Gillian went out to where his taxi was waiting. "What would you do with $1,000 if you had it?" he asked the driver. "I would open a saloon," answered the driver. "I know a place that would be wonderful for a saloon. If you want to invest money, I can show you." "No, thank you. I just asked from curiosity. Drive till I tell you to stop." They drove silently for a while. Then Gillian said suddenly, "I forgot something. You may drive to the law offices of Tallman and Sharp on Broadway." Lawyer Tallman looked at Gillian with surprise as he entered the offices. "I beg your pardon," said Gillian cheerfully, "but may I ask you a question? Has my uncle left anything to Miss Hayden besides the ring and $10? "Nothing," said Mr. Tallman. "I thank you very much, sir," said Gillian, and went out to his taxi. He gave the driver the address of his late uncle's home. Miss Hayden, dressed in black, was writing letters in the library. She was small and slender, and she had beautiful eyes. The door of the library opened, and Gillian came in. "I've just come from Mr. Tallman," he explained. "They've gone over the papers once again and found—" Gillian tried hard to remember the legal term. "Codicil to the will. It seemed that the old man left you $1,000. I was driving up this way, and Mr. Tallman asked me to bring you the money. Here it is." And Gillian laid the money beside her on the desk. Miss Hayden turned white. "Oh," she said, and again, "Oh." Gillian turned to the window. "I suppose," he said in a low voice, "that you know that I love you." "I'm sorry," said Miss Hayden, taking the money. "There is no use?" asked Gillian. "I'm sorry," she said again. "May I write a note?" asked Gillian with a smile. He sat down at the big library table. She gave him a pen and some paper, and then went back to her desk. Gillian made out the account of how he had spent the $1,000 in these words: "Paid by Robert Gillian £1,000 for the happiness of the best and dearest woman on earth." Gillian put the note into an envelope and went out. His taxi stopped again at the offices of Tallman and Sharp. "I've spent the $1,000, he said cheerfully to Tallman, "and here is the account." And he put the white envelope on the lawyer's table. Without touching the envelope, Mr. Tallman went to the door and called his partner, Mr. Sharp. Together they opened a large safe and took out a big sealed envelope. They opened it, and together they read the document that was inside. Then Mr. Tallman spoke. "Mr. Gillian," he said solemnly, "there was a codicil to your uncle's will. It was given to us privately with instructions not to open it until you had given us a full account of how you spent the $1,000. As you have already done so, my partner and I have read the codicil. It says that if you have spent the $1,000 in a way that deserves reward, that is, if you have spent the money in a wise or unselfish way, you are to get $50,000. But if you have used this money as you have used the money in the past, the $50,000 is to be paid to Miriam Hayden, ward of the late Mr. Gilliam. Now, Mr. Gilliam, Mr. Sharp and I shall look through your account." Mr. Tallman reached for the envelope, but Gillian was a little quicker than he. He took the envelope and tore the account into pieces and put them into his pocket. "It's all right," he said smilingly. "You needn't worry about this. I've lost all the money on the races. Good day to you, gentlemen." He went out of the office, whistling cheerfully in the corridor as he waited for the lift.